Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was supposed to be a simple expedition, nothing out of the ordinary. A group of seasoned divers had gathered for a deep-sea exploration off the coast of the Azores, where the ocean floor was rumored to be rich with shipwrecks, unexplored caves, and other lost treasures. They set off aboard the Calypso, a sturdy research vessel, ready for a week-long dive into the heart of the deep. The crew consisted of the ship's captain, a few scientists, and a pair of experienced deep-sea divers, all confident in their abilities to navigate whatever the ocean might throw at them. The first couple of days went by without incident. They found old artifacts in wrecks, marveled at the strange creatures lurking in the darkness, and conducted their studies. But on the third day, everything changed. They received an odd signal from their sonar, a faint, irregular pulse coming from the depths. At first, they thought it was just a glitch or interference, but the signal kept coming back, growing stronger and more insistent, almost like a heartbeat coming from beneath the sea. Captain Maria Vance, a pragmatic woman with years of experience on the water, decided to investigate. She ordered a dive, sending 2 of the divers, Matt and Alice, to descend into the deep, armed with their standard diving gear and communication equipment. Their mission was simple: find the source of the pulse and report back. As they descended into the inky blackness, the pressure around them increased, and the light from their torches barely pierced the surrounding darkness. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. There was no sound of whales, no distant echoes of the ocean's currents. It was as though the entire world had gone quiet, and they were drifting in some kind of abyssal vacuum. The pulse from the sonar was constant now, reverberating in their earpieces like a heavy thud against their skulls. It felt wrong. After what seemed like an eternity, they found the source of the pulse. It wasn't a natural formation or a shipwreck, as they had expected. Instead, they found something that defied logic entirely, a massive spherical object buried half in the ocean floor. Its surface was smooth and unnervingly reflective, unlike anything they'd ever seen. There were no seams, no markings, just a perfectly round metallic orb that seemed to hum with an almost imperceptible vibration. Alice was the first to approach it, her curiosity overwhelming her hesitation. She reached out to touch the surface, but before her hand could make contact, the pulse grew louder, sharper, more erratic. Matt pulled her back, his face pale with fear. Something was wrong. The air around them seemed to crackle with an unnatural energy. They tried to back away, but the ocean floor beneath them seemed to shift, pulling them closer to the orb. It was as if the very water itself was alive, grasping at them. Then, without warning, the orb began to shift. Slowly at first, it rotated, the deep thrum growing louder and more disorienting. And then, it opened. The surface of the orb split like an iris, revealing a dark, gaping interior that seemed to pulse with an unnatural light. From within, something reached out. Matt's heart pounded in his chest as he grabbed Alice and tried to swim away. But the pull of the orb was too strong, the water growing thick and viscous around them. It was as if they were swimming through molasses, fighting against an unseen force dragging them back. Then, the presence, whatever it was inside the orb, began to manifest. At first, it was just a shape, indistinct and shadowy. But as the light from their torches caught it, they saw what it truly was. It was something that looked human, but not quite. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, its skin pale and stretched tightly over its bones. Its eyes were huge, black voids that seemed to suck in all the light around them. It didn't move like a person. It floated, its limbs twisting unnaturally, bending in ways that made Matt's stomach churn. The figure reached out a long, gnarled hand, and for a brief moment, Alice thought she saw its fingers twitch, as if beckoning them toward it. And then something worse happened. The water around them turned icy cold, freezing to the bone, and they felt an overwhelming sense of dread and despair wash over them. They could hear whispers now, soft and incomprehensible, emanating from the orb, as though 1,000 voices were speaking in unison. The whispers became clearer, urging them, pleading with them, warning them to leave. But it was too late. Matt and Alice tried to make their escape, but the orb's grip on the water tightened. Their oxygen tanks were running low, and the world around them seemed to warp and distort. The whispers grew louder, more desperate, filling their ears with an overwhelming pressure. And just before the darkness closed in, Alice saw something in the distance, a shape. It was the silhouette of the Calypso, the ship they had come on, but it was wrong. It was too far away, drifting as if caught in some kind of distortion, stretching out into infinity. That was the last thing Alice saw before everything went black. When the team aboard the Calypso finally managed to bring the divers back to the surface, they were frantic, but there was no sign of them. No physical trace. The communication equipment had failed, and the dive team was gone. No distress signals, no signs of struggle. Only the eerie silence of the ocean greeted them. Days later, as the crew searched the ocean, they discovered something truly horrifying. A pattern in the water, like ripples emanating from the spot where the orb had been. The sonar confirmed it. There was something still down there, beneath the waves, waiting. The pulse had never stopped. And then the whispers started again. Only this time, they were coming from the ship. Some say the orb was a vessel, a sentient entity from a long-forgotten civilization, abandoned in the depths for eternity. Others believe it is something far worse, something that seeks to claim those who venture too close, trapping their souls in the abyss forever. The Calypso disappeared a month later, never to be heard from again. The crew was lost, but not forgotten, and the ocean, as always, remained silent.
Story number 2.
The crew of the Nereus, an advanced research vessel, had been cruising along the coast of New Zealand for weeks, mapping the ocean floor, collecting samples, and diving into the dark depths of the South Pacific. Their mission was to explore some of the most uncharted and unexplored regions of the ocean, places that no human had ever ventured before. The team was small, just a handful of scientists, oceanographers, and divers. They were accustomed to the dark silence of the deep sea, but nothing could have prepared them for what they would encounter in the abyss. It all began on the 5th day of their latest expedition. The crew had deployed the submersible, nicknamed Abyssal, to investigate an odd anomaly detected by sonar deep beneath the waves. It wasn't large, just a small blip on the radar, but it had caught the attention of Dr. Henry Davidson, the chief oceanographer. He had spent years studying oceanic anomalies, and this one was unlike anything he had ever seen. The submersible descended slowly, its lights cutting through the thick darkness like a knife. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the surroundings became. The water temperature dropped sharply, and a sense of dread crept into the submersible. They were now venturing into a part of the ocean that had never been explored, a place where even the most advanced technology struggled to penetrate. The pressure of the water felt oppressive, as if it was bearing down on them, pushing them into the cold, alien depths. When the submersible reached the coordinates, the sonar began to pick up a dense, oddly shaped formation beneath them. It was a structure, or at least it appeared to be one. Its jagged edges glinted eerily in the submersible's lights, and its sheer size made it seem like something from another world. It resembled an ancient ruin, broken pillars, crumbling walls, and strange geometric patterns etched into the stone. The sheer scale of the formation was unlike anything they had ever seen. Henry ordered the submersible to approach the structure. As they drew closer, the cameras captured images of something far more disturbing. The walls were not made of stone, as they had initially believed. They were flesh, pulsing, shifting, and twitching with an unnatural life. The texture of the material was like that of human skin, but warped and stretched to an impossible degree. It seemed to breathe. The entire structure was alive. The crew aboard the Abyssal were stunned into silence. They had expected to find an ancient shipwreck or perhaps a natural geological formation, but what they had discovered was something far worse, something far more terrifying. And then the structure began to move. At first, it was just a tremor, a slight shift in the ground. But then the walls of the structure began to undulate, as if something inside was waking up. The team's instruments began to malfunction. First, the sonar, then the cameras, and finally the communication systems. Dr. Davidson shouted for the submersible to pull away, but it was too late. The structure's flesh seemed to react to their presence, and the submersible was suddenly caught in a powerful magnetic force that pulled it closer. In the chaos that followed, the crew tried to regain control of the submersible, but the force was overwhelming. The walls of the structure closed in around them, and the submersible was trapped. It was as though the very ocean itself had turned against them, holding them in a vice-like grip. The lights flickered, the air grew thin, and the pressure mounted, crushing their chests. Then came the whispers. The crew had assumed the pressure and stress were getting to them. But the whispers were not in their heads. They were real. The soft, unintelligible murmurs began to fill the submersible, coming from all around them, from within the walls of the living structure. The words were alien, ancient, and filled with an indescribable malevolence. The whispers grew louder, their tone growing more frantic and urgent. In the darkness of the submersible, the crew began to see shapes, shadows moving just outside their windows. Figures, humanoid in shape, but twisted and malformed, their limbs bending at impossible angles. Their faces were pale, distorted, their eyes wide and black, staring directly at the crew with an intensity that sent chills down their spines. Dr. Davidson, the calmest of them all, was the first to speak. "Get us out of here. Now." But as they tried to activate the submersible's ascent procedure, the structure around them seemed to respond. The flesh of the walls rippled, and the temperature inside the submersible plummeted. They could feel the water growing colder, far colder than it should have been, as though something from the abyss had taken hold of them. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The whispers ceased. The shadows vanished. The pressure lightened, and the submersible systems rebooted. The crew was able to regain control, and they shot back to the surface, hearts pounding in their chests, their minds racing with what they had just witnessed. When they surfaced, they were greeted by silence. The Nereus crew pulled them aboard, but the expedition was called off immediately. The crew of the Abyssal never spoke about what had happened during the dive. They couldn't. They had all witnessed something that defied explanation, something that no one could truly comprehend. Years passed, and the footage from the dive was eventually analyzed by the world's leading experts in deep-sea exploration. But every recording, every image was corrupted beyond repair. The data had been wiped clean. Nothing could prove what they had encountered in the depths of the ocean. But the crew knew the truth. They had discovered something ancient and horrifying, something that should never have been disturbed, something that had waited in the dark for millennia, buried beneath the waves, biding its time. And now they were certain of one thing. The ocean was not a place of peace. It was a tomb, and they had awoken something from it. Somewhere deep below, in the darkest corners of the sea, the structure still waits, its flesh still rippling, its whispers still calling to those who dare to venture too close. And every so often, a diver will disappear, their body never to be found, as if the ocean itself has reclaimed them. The ocean, after all, is alive, and it has its secret.
Story number 3.
The Orca's Dream had a reputation. It was an experimental deep-sea research vessel that had been outfitted with the latest technology to explore the uncharted depths of the Atlantic Ocean. A group of elite marine biologists, oceanographers, and engineers had been selected for this exclusive expedition. Their goal was to study a series of mysterious, unexplained phenomena that had been detected in a deep-water trench off the coast of Bermuda. Strange occurrences, bizarre sonar signals, and sightings of unknown creatures had been reported in the area for decades. But it wasn't until the Orca's Dream set sail that the world began to understand just how terrifying those mysteries truly were. The crew was eager, excited even, to uncover the secrets that the ocean had been keeping. They were fully aware of the legends, stories of ships vanishing into the Bermuda Triangle, whispers of ancient underwater ruins, and strange, almost sentient creatures lurking in the deep. But they had no idea what they were about to encounter. The first few days of the expedition were routine. The crew conducted tests, mapped out the ocean floor, and lowered their submersible, the Leviathan, to capture footage of the underwater world. However, the deeper they went, the stranger things began to get. On the 5th day, the submersible made a startling discovery. It wasn't a shipwreck or a forgotten artifact. It was something far more disturbing. The sonar readings picked up a massive stationary object resting on the ocean floor at a depth of over 25,000 feet. The object was large, too large to be anything natural. It was perfectly round, metallic, and had strange markings etched into its surface. The crew aboard the Orca's Dream stared at the images that were sent back from the submersible. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. Dr. Miriam Clark, the lead oceanographer, ordered the submersible to investigate further. As they descended closer to the object, they noticed something even more unnerving. The water around it seemed to shimmer, as though it was alive. The deeper the submersible went, the more distorted the view became. The images from the cameras grew blurry, and the temperature of the water seemed to drop by several degrees. But it wasn't until the submersible was within 100 feet of the object that they saw it. Something was moving inside. A massive shape shifted within the dark shadows of the sphere. It wasn't a creature, not exactly. It was something more like a presence. A vast, undulating mass that seemed to pulsate with life. The submersible's lights flickered and the communication system began to glitch. Then, for a split second, they saw it clearly. A face. A face that was not human, its eyes wide, its features distorted, but its expression unmistakable. It was watching them. And in that moment, the crew knew that whatever this thing was, it was aware of them. Before anyone could react, the submersible was violently jerked as though caught by an unseen hand. The lights flickered out and the pressure sensors went haywire. The crew inside the Leviathan screamed in panic, but there was no sound outside the submersible. It was as if the ocean had swallowed their voices. In the chaos, Dr. Clark and her team scrambled to regain control, but it was futile. The submersible was pulled down into the depths, deeper than any human had ever ventured before. The hull creaked under the immense pressure as the temperature inside plummeted, and the water outside seemed to grow even colder, turning into an almost unnatural chill. The face, if it could be called that, appeared again, its features twisting and contorting as it moved closer to the submersible's window. The team watched in horror as the face pressed against the glass, its eyes now glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. There was something wrong with it. Its mouth opened, but no sound came from it. The crew felt their bodies growing numb, as if the cold was seeping into their very bone, and then the submersible was released, thrown violently back toward the surface, as if whatever had held it in its grip had decided to let go. When the Leviathan finally emerged from the depths and returned to the Orca's Dream, the crew was visibly shaken. Dr. Clark and her team were pale, their eyes wide with fear. They refused to speak about what had happened, and the footage from the submersible was destroyed before it could be analyzed. The instruments on board the ship were damaged beyond repair, and the readings they had taken from the area were corrupted, as if the ocean itself had erased any trace of their encounter. The crew tried to leave the Bermuda Trench, but they found that the ocean was no longer the same. Their navigation systems malfunctioned, their compass spun wildly, and the ship seemed to drift in circles. The sea around them became thick with an unnatural fog, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. The crew was trapped, unable to navigate, unable to escape. Then, one by one, they began to disappear. First, it was the communications officer. He was standing on the deck one moment and gone the next. The crew searched the entire ship, but there was no sign of him. Then, the ship's engineer vanished. No trace, no explanation. The remaining crew began to hear whispers in the dark, soft murmurs that seemed to come from the water itself, calling them toward the edge of the ship. Those who ventured too close to the water's edge never returned. Dr. Clark was the last to go. She had been on the ship the longest, and her mind had already begun to unravel. She stood by the railing, staring into the fog, when she felt the unmistakable pull of something unseen, something that had been watching them from the depths. She knew it was time to face whatever it was. As she stepped into the water, the fog parted briefly, and she saw it. The face. The same face that had pressed against the submersible's window. It was there, just beneath the surface, watching her with those glowing eyes. Then, everything went silent. The Orca's Dream was found days later, drifting aimlessly in the water. There was no sign of the crew, and no explanation for their disappearance. The ship's logs were blank, the crew's final communications corrupted. But those who had been close to the Bermuda Triangle whispered of a presence in the deep, something that waited, patient, ancient, and malevolent, waiting for the next ship to stray too close. The ocean hides its secrets well, and some secrets, once uncovered, should never be disturbed.